People say I'm no good.
Through the ages, philosophers and theologians have debated the nature of evil. Is it a physical force? Can it be measured, understood, predicted, or altered? Is evil a cause, an effect, or is it simply the absence of good? On this broadcast, we come face to face with a man that many say inspired and committed the crime of the century. His name is Charles Manson.
Benwood McMecken sits right along the Ohio River. It's one of those places where you were a coal miner, a railroad worker, or a steel worker, and everybody seemed to get along real well. It was one of those situations where you didn't lock your house. There was a lot of camaraderie there, and it was very cordial.
McMecken, West Virginia. It's one of the many little mill and mining towns that cling to hills along the Ohio River.
McMecken was a small town. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody's mother knew you. Charles, he was a first grader, and he came to live with his grandmother.
Most people here don't remember Charles Manson, but this was the closest thing he had to a hometown when he was growing up. He lived with an aunt and uncle in this house. School records in McMecken show Manson was an average student in the second, third, and fourth grades.
This area of Benwood and McMecken was quite unique. There was 5 grocery stores, and there were 4 churches and 32 bars. But it was a nice town to grow up in. The milkman delivered your milk, and the grocery store delivered your groceries. But it was a good community. In no way did it reflect the outcome of a person like Charles Manson. Of course, we didn't know then who he was, nor did we know what he would become.
I'd have to say, when a child is treated the way he was, you're doomed. I don't think you stand much of a chance. I mean, he could have gone a different way. I don't know. I guess the cards didn't fall that way. But he wasn't what I would call a bad person. He was a person who might have tried to be better, but it was hard. I went to church at the Nazarene Church here in McMecken, which is a small church. And I was friends with his aunt and uncle and grandmother. His uncle's name was Bill, his aunt was Glenna. And Bill worked for the B&O, which was a very good job to have. That was really the highest paid in this city. They were nice people. They really were very talented musically. And Mrs. Maddox was Charles's grandmother, who was just a wonderful, wonderful woman. I mean, I can't imagine anyone who didn't really love her. She was such a sweet, good person. Yeah.
My grandma was a mountain girl from Kentucky, up in the mountains, and she never did drink or smoke or cuss or lie. She used to cook for the Salvation Army, and she was a human being. Good one.
She lived her faith, and she kind of led people to her way of thinking, which was a good way of thinking. But I don't know if Charles's mother wanted to adhere to that. She seemed to love a good time, a little bit of partying, and there was mention of that from time to time.
The Nazarene Church had several edicts for his young people. They included you had to go to church every Sunday, you had to obey your parents, no going to the movies, no sinful dancing, and above all, you could not become over-familiar with members of the opposite sex. There was a lot of rebellion, as there always has been with young people growing up under fundamentalist church rules. But Charlie's mother, Kathleen, was really the exception in that she would actually dare to put up her hair, sneak into a short dress that might leave her arms bare, which was just a carnal act, and go out to dance. But Ashlyn was too small. If you tried to dance or if you even smiled at a boy, Mama would hear about it. So she would sneak across the river to try to get away from her mother and just have what she considered innocent fun, dancing. Once she came back home pregnant, she was pretty much held up as an example to the other kids. See, you don't follow the rules, this is going to happen to you. Charles Manson was not, as he likes to claim, an illegitimate baby who was known as No Name because there was some doubt as to who was his father. It was always known that his biological father was a man named Colonel Scott, not a military man, an older man, a married man who'd pretty much seduced Charlie's teenage mother at a dance hall. We don't know much about William Manson, but he was somebody that apparently had also met Kathleen at the dance halls. He married her, and he went into the marriage well aware that his wife was pregnant with another man's child. Ultimately, he was named Charles Mills Manson in honor of his deceased grandfather, Charles Mills Maddox. For Manson, as a child, he was never living in any one place for too long. His mother moved too much for that. For the first 4.5 years of his life, Charlie mostly lived in a series of homes and apartments stretching from Cincinnati in Ohio all the way to McMecken, with Ashland, Kentucky in between. And when his Uncle Bill and Aunt Glenna lived in Charleston, West Virginia, sometimes Charlie and his mother would live with them. So it was pretty much a move-around life for the little boy. The constant in it, besides his mother, was his grandmother, who would always be nearby.
Most of us work hard to provide our homes with every possible comfort for our children. We safeguard their health. We strive to set before them good examples of moral living, of manners and deportment.
Charlie's grandmother believed that if she did not bring her children up in the right way, they were not only going to hell, but she would too, because she would have let down the Lord. Particularly because her husband had died, she was worried about her two youngest children, Luther and Kathleen, who she believed were growing up without a father's influence and therefore had tendencies.
Last game is over. The last movie out. The American citizen has a final alternative to home in another currently flourishing institution, the nightclub.
During the first few years of Charlie's life, even when Kathleen was still married, she began going out with her brother Luther and his friends, and she was not behaving in the way that a mother with a child was supposed to behave. Her marriage to William Manson didn't last that long, about 2.5 years. He left her and cited that Kathleen was unfaithful. She was gone most of the time. And he made very clear in the divorce decree that there had been no issue from their marriage, meaning that he said in court Charlie was not his child. That meant he didn't have to pay child support.
When you were a boy, did you love your mother?
I didn't know what that was.
When Charlie was about 4.5 years old, Kathleen and her brother Luther got a little bit wilder. The night came when Kathleen and Luther's girlfriend, Julia, decided to go out on the town a little bit. The ladies go out to a club, and there they meet a gentleman and decided this guy had money and they wanted some of it. They went to a phone and called up Luther. Luther told them, get the guy in his car and drive to this filling station on the edge of town. I will be waiting there. Luther shows up. He has in his possession a ketchup bottle filled with salt, which he tries to stick in the guy's back and say, this is a gun. I've got you covered. Give me your money. And the guy said, it's a bottle. It's not a gun. At which point, Luther walloped him over the head with it. And they grabbed the guy's wallet, found it made about $20 in the deal, and drove off in his stolen car. The local papers think it's the funniest thing they've ever had to write about, and they start writing about the ketchup bottle bandits. Because Luther assaulted the man, hit him over the head with the ketchup bottle, he gets 10 years in the Moundsville State Prison. Kathleen got 5 years. And they are sent off to one of the most draconian prisons in the entire United States. And there's little 4.5-year-old Charlie. What's to become of him?
Come all you West Virginia gals and listen to my noise. Don't you court these West Virginia boys. If you do, your portion will be cornbread and bacon. You will see cornbread and bacon.
We know that Charlie is not quite 5 years old when his mother went to prison and the decision had to be made, where's he going to live? And because the jail in Moundsville was so close to McMecken, where his uncle and aunt and their daughter, Joanne, lived, the decision was made that Charlie would live permanently in McMecken during the 5 years of his mother's prison term, and they could see where he went from there. Almost as soon as Charlie is there, and he's had some explanation from his grandmother, Mama made a mistake. She's going to be living in a place for a few years, but you're going to see her all the time. Uncle Bill, a stern disciplinarian who believed that little boys, even if they're just 4 or 4.5, do not cry. They do not whimper. They are tough. Took the child to Moundsville.
It's been said that if Charles Manson has any roots at all, they are in the penal system.
Well, one of my first recollections is walking in Moundsville State Prison, West Virginia. Big gray stone place. and I come to visit my mom. She was doing time there. For what? Strong arm robbery.
The prison in Moundsville is one of the most intimidating places possible. It looks like some old medieval castle. The walls were between 8 to 12 feet thick. It was meant to be intimidating. Every type of prisoner was in Moundsville. You had the people like Luther and Kathleen, who were there because they were too dumb to carry out any kind of decent crime, all the way up to the worst kinds of criminals, multiple murderers, rapists. The major attraction of the prison were the hangings. There was standing room only for the hangings. It was a bleak, horrible place. And not just for the inmates, but for family who would want to go visit them, because they'd sort of be forced into narrow little viewing rooms. When you saw your relative who was an inmate, you didn't sit across the table, you could never touch anyone. There was a thick glass partition, and you had to sit on one side and not move, and the prisoner was on the other side. So it was a horrible experience for everyone, and it was meant to be. There's his mother on the other side of the glass. He can't touch her, she can hug him, and for the entire sentence, she is never allowed to touch her son. And Charlie screams and he acts girly and like a sissy, and Uncle Bill is disgusted and drags him off, but on a regular basis, never wanting to go because the place was so awful, little Charlie Manson would be taken to see his mother in that prison. And every time he had a terrible reaction. He never got used to it, but then who would?
Are there happy memories?
I don't have that.
Are sad memories, though, growing up?
I don't have all that.
Yeah. You do have it. You have an experience. You're an individual, one human being with experiences.
When you leave, go get a big rock and set it on a table.
Yeah.
I'm that rock on the table.
Meaning
I don't have all those things.
But you do have all those things.
No, you do. And you think that I do because you think that my mind is like your mind, but it isn't.
I don't think he was evil at the beginning. I didn't see any signs that Charles would have turned into the kind of person he ended up. You know, it's strange what can change your life, because he did have a hard life as a child, and she wasn't a good mother, and it never got better. It was never going to get better.
Uncle Bill drank too much. He was very short-tempered. And Charlie was a very disagreeable child. Wherever he lived, he would have been a problem because he whined most of the time, he complained, he would just fib incessantly about everything. And the first grade teacher whose class Charlie ended up in was known as a really mean woman. Even her own colleagues, the other teachers, thought she was really rough on the kids.
I would never want one of my children to be in her class. I mean, the way she ran her class was the way you would run a prison. In her class, you were placed with what she deemed your intelligence. So she would place people together, the dum-dums and the smart kids and the ones in the middle. And Charles was placed in the back of the room. You know, this was so crazy for first graders because I envisioned a teacher like I had who just showed they loved us. And this was so crazy to me. Didn't anybody ever check on these people?
On the first day of school, he came home sobbing, saying the teacher had said such mean things to him. And very likely she did. I talked to other people at McMecken who had been in her classes, and they all agreed that she was one of those nasty teachers who couldn't stand little boys in particular.
And I can understand why he went home crying, because it was really horrible for him. And I just think he wasn't given much of a chance.
Uncle Bill was horrified, but not that the teacher had been harsh with Charlie. In those days, it was always assumed if the teacher got mad at a child, the child deserved it. What Uncle Bill couldn't stand was that this 5-year-old boy cried and acted like a sissy. He acted like a girl. And Joanne can remember her father coming into her room and rustling among her clothes and coming out with a dress. Charlie Manson told all kinds of lies about his childhood. This story he didn't need to make up or embellish. This is the one that was bad enough. Yes, he was sent to school in a dress as a 5-year-old by his uncle. All fathers in McMecken were rough on their sons. Bill wasn't Charlie's father, but he took his responsibility for him very seriously. Forever after that, Charlie did just the worst things you could imagine. And it was almost as though he liked getting in trouble. The second time I sat down with Joanne to talk, she said that when Charles was in 2nd grade, there was a boy in his class he didn't like. And one day at recess, all the girls went over as a gang and beat up the boy. And when they were all brought into the principal's office, they said they did it because Charles Manson had asked them to. And Charles said, "I never touched that boy. Those girls were just doing what they wanted to do. They ought to be in trouble, not me."
The Nazarene Church believes strongly in prayer. And there was Sunday school for the young people, and the pastor taught the class. And Charles came.
Charlie Manson is a sponge. There is nothing unique about Manson, any of his philosophies, any of the things he preaches. What he would do is he would cherry pick lines that would help him appear to have a philosophy. And it starts with the Bible that he learns in the Church of the Nazarene. Manson was taken from the beginning by the teachings that he heard every day based on the Bible, that women were subservient to men, that the wife is ruled by the husband. Yes, Jesus was born of a virgin. Yes, the devil is here every day in our lives. And most of all, you better believe the book of Revelation. He's hearing this every Sunday, over and over again. And Charles Manson will never be well educated. He's never going to be able to read very well. But there is a gift that Charlie Manson has from childhood. He has an incredible memory. The Bible, song lyrics, everything. And as an adult, he will be able to quote, particularly from the book of Revelation, and they're word for word perfect.
I understand when he quotes the Bible where that's coming from. That's coming from Grandma. I think that's where he gets that, and he can do it.
The Bible, the Bible, the Bible is being pounded into this child's head. And as an adult, he can cherry pick the best phrases, remember them, and at the appropriate time, present them almost as his own thoughts. Young Charlie Manson in McMecken is remembered mostly for horrible behavior. But there was always this other part of Charlie that people would remark on. His aunt and uncle had a beat-up old upright piano in their home, and from the time Charlie is 7, 8 years old, he sits at the piano and tries to pick out tunes on it. Much more so than the other young kids in McMecken, he was already picking up on what passed for the popular music of the day.
Where did Charlie Manson come from? What are your earliest memories?
I come from the heart of Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra.
Those were the people that you listened to as a child?
Yeah.
He didn't have a wonderful singing voice, but he had a reasonably pleasant one. He would have to be physically dragged to church on Sundays, but when hymns were sung, he'd brighten up and he'd try his best to sing.
He wasn't attentive, I can tell you. He wasn't attentive in Sunday school. His mind wandered. I mean, he just wasn't, but he still came. And Glenna and Bill Thomas were very musical, and Mrs. Maddox, who's Charles's grandmother, she also had a great singing voice. They were all very musical.
One of Charlie's stated ambitions early was he wanted to be a singer just like Frankie Lane. And because he did have apparently some musical and vocal talent, people thought, that might happen. The one job nobody at Moundsville Prison wanted was to be assigned to the janitorial staff. There's vomit, there's blood, there's urine all over the floors. The janitors were constantly having to clean up. Kathleen was so determined she wanted to get out of prison that she did everything she was asked to do and did them so well she's paroled 3 years into her 5-year sentence. And yet, this isn't any kind of fairy tale. When she gets out of prison, she stays briefly in McMecken. She's got her little boy back, but there's still the influence of her mother, who she thinks is just going to grind her down like she did the first time. And let's remember, this is now just a 20-year-old. She still wants to go out and enjoy herself. And so they move to other little towns in the area, and Kathleen gets a job as a clerk in a grocery store. Doesn't make much money, but it's a job. She's trying to be a good mom. She's sending her son to school, except he won't go to school. She can take him there, walk him to class, but then she has to go to work, and the minute she does, he disappears. The truant officers are showing up at her door. Your son ran away from school again. Sometimes, to her amazement, he'll show up at her grocery store while she's working during the day, and he will be begging customers for handouts. It's a sad, sad situation.
School records in McMecken show Manson was an average student in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grades. Then he went to live again with his mother. In this neighborhood in Indianapolis, he had his first brush with the law for stealing a bicycle and then a car.
Kathleen decides she has to do something. And so she takes a very difficult step. Kathleen had read about the Gibault School for Boys. This was an open campus. There weren't prison walls or anything. You know, it was stricter, but it would be something where Charlie would have to behave. This was not his mother turning him into the authorities, as he would always claim it is. But unfortunately, this is just the first step in what's going to be a series of places Charlie Manson is going to be placed. He ran away soon after, came home to Mom. I trust you, you're my mother, how can you do this to me? To make her feel guilty.
That always was upmost in my mind, you know, the fact that he did try to escape there and his mother would take him right back, which had to be so painful. In my eyes, that's very painful. I can't imagine it, And I always felt that, you know, just a little bit of help, a little bit of love might have made a big difference in his life. I really do. It's cruel. And I think that was the beginning of the end.
The things he did, which soon began to involve first petty theft, then he would break away and go into armed theft. He went to a series of different places, more and more up the ladder, so to speak, into full-time detention. He was once lucky enough to get sent to Boys Town, convincing a judge in Indianapolis when he was 12 that, hey, I'm a Catholic, even though he wasn't. And he's sent to Boys Town, one of the most famous places in all America. There's movies that are being made about this. He lasts 4 days, and he and some of the other boys steal a car belonging to a priest and head out. As with Kathleen, he's very inept at trying to elude the law. He's caught, he goes back, but nothing was ever Charlie's fault as far as Manson was concerned.
He was sent to the Indiana Boys School, the state reform school. He wouldn't conform to the rules and was moved from one dormitory to another. Manson compiled 28 bad conduct reports in 2 years.
He was, as I described perhaps 20 years ago, a chronic discipline problem, even at that time.
How was he regarded by the other boys?
The other students seemed to regard him as a boy they liked to mingle with. Manson seemed to have a lot of stories to tell that was of interest to the other boys.
The file on Manson at the reform school shows he escaped 5 times. There are letters there from his aunt and grandmother in which they write of their love for him and their hopes that he would do better.
The consensus was he was self-centered, generally lazy, cooperated only under pressure, and had little influence on other people for either good or bad.
You have said before that you needed love, and you needed family, and you needed friends, and that's the one thing that every man needs.
No, you misunderstood. I never said anything like that.
Do you want to look back at that early period of your life and say, boy, something went wrong, you know, and I went to foster homes, and then my mother would take me, then I'd go see my grandmother, and then I'd go back and see my mother, and did that shape you? Did it make a difference?
Well, see, that doesn't even compute in my world because, like, there is no wrong.
Do you need to be loved?
I am loved.
By whom?
I am love.
Are you loved?
I am love.
In the tougher reform schools, it is absolutely true that Charlie Manson, one of the smaller, weaker boys, is certainly picked on. He certainly suffers physical indignities, and we can be fairly well assured he is sexually assaulted. Manson recognizes early on that it's just human nature to back away from someone who's an absolute lunatic. He studies, he thinks, and he perfects the act. If someone bigger, scarier is approaching him, he will act so insane, so violently out of control, that even the worst bullies will back off and leave him alone. He calls it being crazy Charlie. And he will use this again throughout his adult life.
We all do what we have to do to survive, right?
It's like a long time ago, back in the 50s when I was in reform school. I would get in a fight or I'd get in an argument and I'd be down in solitary confinement. I'd just go dun 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 dun. I turned everything off a long time ago.
And yet, from these experiences, Charles doesn't abhor the terrible things done to him. Rather, he wants to do them to other boys. In one instance, he's found sodomizing another younger boy while holding a piece of broken glass to his throat, threatening to kill him. When he would be asked about having been raped as a child in school, Charlie said, "So what?" It's just like if it happens, you wipe it off. Manson finally ended up in a maximum security detention facility in Chillicothe. This was the place that kids were sent when they were so bad. There was no other place for them to go until they turned 21. There were kids in there who had committed murder already. What he did is completely unparalleled in the rest of his life. This time, for months, he is the model inmate. Follows every rule, tries hard in school. And there's the innate belief that every once in a while there has to be some kid that we've really helped. Maybe this is a success story. And at this facility, there was the honor award, that you have completely overcome all the terrible things that brought you here. And it wasn't given out often, but it was given out to Charles Mills Manson. Charlie had conned the people who were certain no kid could ever fool him. And so, miraculously, there it is. Charlie Manson has completely turned a new leaf, and he's going to be a model citizen.
When he was released, he went back to McMicken, worked at a few odd jobs, and a few months later, he was married here. They moved into a house across the street.
Well, a lot of people didn't know Charlie Manson even lived around here. You know, he was virtually friendless. He was sort of the type of person, it's like a school kid who wore a raincoat to school on a sunny day. I mean, just no one jumped to be around him. He was very low-key.
He wasn't outgoing, no. And no one seemed to make an effort to seek Charles out or introduce themselves. He was a kind of a cocky, let's start a fight type of guy, and a blowhard, that kind of a person. I didn't know that side of him. We enjoyed his company. Barbara, my cousin Barbara, and I both enjoyed his company, and Charles might have been a little shy and very attractive, had a dimple, had curly black hair, and he had beautiful eyes.
50 years later, people will tell you, well, you just know in every town there's a good girl who can't resist a bad boy.
What about your wife? You were married once, weren't you?
Yeah.
How'd that go? Why'd you want to get married? That's kind of conventional. That's kind of normal. That's kind of in the rut, as you say, to get married.
I wanted to get in that pussy. That's why I got married.
Married for sex was the reason you got married.
Yeah, that's what I didn't know what was happening. I knew there was something happening, but no one would tell me, so I had to find out. You know, I didn't have books like you guys, Playboys and stuff in them days. I had to find out for myself.
Charlie's grandmother throws a lovely party for them, a reception after the wedding in her house. We have pictures.
Rosalie worked at Wierzinski's grocery. I thought she was rather quiet and kind of reserved, not outgoing so much. I kept it to myself, but I thought she's very attractive, and I wouldn't mind having her for a girlfriend. She's very pleasant, cordial, very nice person. I had seen her across the street standing with Charlie, and that kind of bursted my bubble a little bit because I thought he was relatively quiet, and if you ask him a question, you didn't expect to get much more than a yes or no answer. But he just seemed to come in and sweep Rosalie off her feet, and that's the last I heard of Rosalie at the store.
The reception was at Glenna's home, and my mother, Dad, and I went there for the reception. It was small, but it was a nice time. But the one thing that I noticed that night, I have never seen him that happy in my life.
For married couples, the way you passed the time of day in the evening was to sit out in the front stoop, and as your neighbors walked by, you'd chat and you'd pass the time of day. And suddenly there's Charlie Manson trying to do this.
I first met Charlie Manson. My first experience, personal experience, was I was on my way to baseball practice, And the coach's wife asked Charlie to drive us down to the ball field, so we climbed into the back seat of his Freddie Flintstone car. He took us to the game, didn't say a word, and when we got out, we thanked him, and he just looked straight ahead and continued on. He said nothing, just drove off. That was Charlie.
And it only lasts a few months. Then Rosalie's pregnant, and there's medical bills. And Charlie gets a second job helping out at a local store, but there's still not enough money. And Charlie starts stealing cars. And he subsidizes for a few months, but it's not working. Kathleen, with her husband Louis, has moved out to California. And so Charlie suggests to Rosalie they go out there. It'll be better there. And so he leaves McMicken with a pregnant child bride in a car he stole to go to California, where he is sure he will somehow become a huge success.
See, my old lady, she said, let's steal a car and go to California. And I said, man, I ain't gonna steal a car and go to California and go back to jail. She says, we won't get caught. We didn't get caught, just I got caught.
You had a son by that marriage, didn't you?
Yeah, I got a kid somewhere.
You think about him?
About as much as my father did me.
Manson's wife had a baby, but before it was born, he was in trouble with the law again, arrested for driving a stolen car to California.
As was his mother, he is one of the most incompetent criminals that ever stole stuff in the history of the United States of America. He steals a car to get to Los Angeles, but instead of ditching the car, he starts driving around LA, seeing the sights. These are in the days when cops will mark down out-of-state license plates and just run casual checks.
These observations can give a definite indication that the vehicle may be stolen, even before a thorough inspection is made or the subject's questioned.
And of course, the car comes back as stolen. That starts Charlie's downfall legally. He would do these extra things that he didn't have to do. And I have talked to psychologists who study criminal behavior, and they will say to me, this is proof that deep down, he always wanted to be in prison. He felt safe there. He's subconsciously doing these dumb things just so he will get back to where he really feels secure.
Tell me, for instance, what the guys do for sex.
Well, there is young boys around. You can always give them a few packs of cigarettes, get what you want.
How do you do that after you're locked up?
Well, you can shower time. Like when they have yard night or something, you can, there's places around here you can go to, of course. They call them spots, you know. Things like that. There's no problem on that.
Charlie Manson's life and the terrible crimes he committed all happened because he's the wrong man in the right place at the right time. And nowhere is this more true than when he is first sent to prison at Terminal Island. The last few years before Charles Manson enters the adult criminal system for the first time, the philosophy of the American criminal system changes.
What are prisons for? When you think about it, there are just a limited number of things a penal system can be asked to do. In the first place, it can be asked to punish those who break the rules. But most civilized societies have not been content with the punishment. They want the punishment to have a purpose.
You're in prison. And maybe one of the reasons you are here is that there was no place for you in a society demanding skills and education. California spends more than any other state on educating and training prisoners. If you don't have a high school education, you're encouraged to get one, and you can learn a trade.
Now we have a whole new philosophy. We've got to work with these people so that they won't have to turn to crime, so they'll have skills that will let them function in the regular world.
You in California are so fortunate. You don't quite realize that 40-odd other states are far behind you, and that the jails and prisons in most of these states are filthy and dehumanizing machinery, that they ruin the people that go into them, and that they harm all the people outside who think that the machine is doing something constructive to the individual who is ground up in it.
So Charlie goes to prison where a couple of years before, it would have been like his mother's experience in Moundsville, where the foot's in the back of your neck and you will do what you're told or else. Now we're going to help you grow as a person. And one of the ways American prisons did this, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People is sweeping the nation.
Hello, everybody. You know, the happiness you get out of life, and to a large extent, the size of your income, will depend very largely upon your ability to win friends and influence people.
Dale Carnegie is a salesman who was brilliant at putting together the kind of tips he learned on the road that would help you if you wanted to sell people something, if you wanted people to like you, little tricks you could play. And there's courses you would sign up for. And all the prisoners at Terminal Island in California, boy, they want to get in on this.
Be sincere. You will just be wasting your time if you pretend to be interested in other people in order to get something out of them.
Sincerity is the best gimmick, remember that. Sincerity and honesty, he said, it'll trick them every time. I said, well, sincere and honesty, I never tried that.
A good smile has the same effect as a puppy's tail. When a puppy wags his tail, he says, I'm glad to see you. And a smile says the same thing.
Charlie eats up the Dale Carnegie course.
Charlie was taking the course, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Very strange.
And within 4 small months after signing up for the Dale Carnegie course, I received a promotion. And 12 months after that, I was promoted to zone sales manager of the Burroughs Corporation.
So, I mean, that's probably where he got a lot of his ideas, and he transformed them into his own way of applying what he learned in that course.
Now, this is the guy who supposedly can hardly read, but his retention when he wants to remember something is perfect. Charlie, in particular, has a couple special things that resonate with him, but he doesn't complete the course because he felt like he'd learned what there was for him to learn. The first is the best way to avoid an argument is not to get into one.
I was walking in the yard, and there was this guy playing a guitar, and the cop came by and said, Manson, you can't play your guitar here. You got to play your guitar over there. And Charlie just kept playing his guitar, and the cop just stopped and said, Manson, you ain't never going to get out of here. Charlie never missed a beat. He said, out of where, man? It just kept going, and that was it. That was my first day with Charles Manson.
That's the first thing. Don't give him anything to tear into. And most importantly, always let the other fellow think that the idea is his.
Charlie directed mental traffic. He wanted to do something, and he'd drop a hint to one of the girls, and one of the girls would say, I got a good idea. Charlie had planted a seed, and off they went, doing his way.
Manson's incredible powers that you hear people talk about all the time, the charisma, the ability not only to read minds, but make people trust him. Straight out of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Word for word. Manson, when he gets out of Terminal Island, has a new career goal. He's going to be a world-class pimp. He liked listening to the pimps at Terminal Island. They gave him advice on how to find the right girls. The rules are simple. You want to find young women who are bent but not broken, emotionally distraught but not completely unhinged. The second thing you have to do is you have to make them depend on you. You control every aspect of their lives. The third thing is you keep them from outside influences. Don't let them talk to family. Don't let them talk to friends. You must be the only person they have to turn to. Charlie did not realize that the biggest challenge is not to recruit girls who will work for you, but to recruit women who would stay working for you. He never had a string of women who could earn enough money to support him the way he wanted. He had to try to subsidize himself in other ways that just got him into further legal trouble. He was a terrible pimp, and soon ends up in jail again, this time at McNeil Island up near Seattle in Washington. In McNeil Island, Manson is once again together with the worst of the worst. The trait that continues to distinguish him from other prisoners is the fact that he is so honestly interested in music. In one of the great ironies in American criminal history, Alvin Creepy Karpis, one of the real serious killers from the Bonnie and Clyde Dillinger days, is also incarcerated at McNeil Island, and he plays steel guitar. And Charlie sucks up to Creepy Karpis and gets guitar lessons from him. Karpis, later, when Manson becomes so infamous, tells an interviewer, "Boy, I didn't know he had that in him." In McNeil, a couple other critical things happen in Manson's development as what we have to call a genius con artist. There are, obviously, in all these prisons, all sorts of religious outlets made available to the prisoners with the belief that God can change you if man can't. On one of his reports from McNeil Island, it says that for the first time, Manson appears to be showing some self-awareness, and he credits it to his study of Scientology. Scientology has managed to sort of pick up a niche, and the prison officials, they may not know all the details of Scientology, but hey, it's a religion, it's recognized as one, so it must be good, it's got God in it. Manson is very interested in the theory in Scientology that your body is simply a vessel that you're temporarily in, and that greater things are always possible. You have the opportunity to be this great, glorious being, and you've probably been that before, and it's just a matter of accepting your nature. He can understand why that would be attractive, and that this would be the kind of psychological tool he could use to impress particularly young women with bad self-images. You may think the situation you're in is really awful, but it's not you. It's just such a temporary thing, and I'm going to teach you how to move beyond it.
The seed grows up from the ground. You go down in the earth to plant something, and you plant these seeds, and this garden grows. It's the same thing with the garden that's in the mind.
You think you'll ever leave prison?
Prison? I got out of jail. I'm inside of you, man. I'm inside every one of you. Can't you see I'm out, man? Can't you see I'm out? Can't you see I'm free?
Every beat of my heart is just for you. And I will love you till my life is through. Every single moment you're away, I just wanna cry. Every single moment I will pray you don't say goodbye, for I would die. Every beat of
Rick, move your head.